A billionaire's daughter poured red wine over a struggling designer's dress in front of hundreds of the city's most powerful people, and laughed. But the man who walked through those ballroom doors next had spent 19 years watching that woman from the shadows, protecting her without ever saying a word. Tonight, his silence was over. Watch this story until the very end. And if it moves you, hit like and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Grand Bella Vista Hotel did not look like a place where someone's life could be destroyed in under 30 seconds. That was part of its design. The lobby alone cost $11 million to restore. Italian marble floors, Austrian crystal chandeliers, live orchids flown in weekly from growers in Thailand. Everything inside those walls existed to communicate a single message. You are either someone or you are nothing. Amara Washington stood outside the main entrance for 4 minutes before she walked in. She told herself it was because she was adjusting the hem of her dress. That was partially true. The other truth, the one she would not say out loud even to herself, was that she was preparing. The way a fighter prepares before walking into a ring they are not entirely sure they belong in. Breathing through her nose, slow and deliberate, counting backward from 10 the way her grandmother used to tell her to do whenever the world got too loud. She was 29 years old and she weighed nearly 180 kilograms. She had known since she was 7 years old that the world would look at her body before it looked at anything else. That was not bitterness talking. That was just the mathematics of how she had been received in every room she had ever entered. People saw the size first. They formed the opinion second. Everything else came later, if it came at all. The dress she wore tonight was turquoise silk. She had designed it herself. She had cut the pattern on her kitchen table over the course of 3 weeks, working after midnight when the apartment was quiet. Her grandmother's old sewing machine, humming under her hands like something alive. She had chosen the color because her grandmother used to say that turquoise was the color of water that had decided to become the sky. She had embroidered small geometric patterns along the neckline and the cuffs using thread she ordered from a supplier in New Mexico, a woman named Claire who sold traditional dyes and asked no questions. The dress was not just a dress. Amara understood that clearly. It was a portfolio piece. It was a statement. It was the physical proof that she was a designer, not an aspiration, not a dream deferred, but a working craftsperson with a genuine voice and the technical skill to execute it. She had spent 11 months building her reputation in the lower tiers of the Los Angeles fashion community. Alterations work, custom pieces for clients who found her through word of mouth. One small runway show at a community arts center in Compton that got 300 views on a YouTube channel run by a 22-year-old fashion blogger who went by the name Celestine Rouge. The Bella Vista Charity Gala was the biggest room she had ever been invited into. The invitation had come through a contact, a mid-level stylist named Deshawn who handled wardrobe for several television personalities, and occasionally threw a +1 to people he thought deserved a look at the upper atmosphere. He had seen Amara's work 6 months ago at a pop-up market in Silver Lake and had texted her the following week. "I think you should be seen by people who write checks. Let me know." She had thought about it for 2 weeks before saying yes. Now she was standing at the top of the marble steps, the sound of a string quartet drifting out through the open doors, and she breathed in through her nose 4 counts, and she walked inside. The ballroom was enormous. 300 guests, maybe more. The kind of crowd where every face looked vaguely familiar because every face belonged to someone who had been photographed enough times to register in the peripheral memory. Executives. Old money families. A handful of musicians and actors who had crossed over into the philanthropic circuit, which in Los Angeles meant they attended events like this one and allowed their presence to be photographed for charity websites. Amara moved through the edge of the room with the controlled deliberateness of someone who had learned early that the safest way to navigate a space where you are being observed is to act as though the observation does not register. She kept her shoulders back. She kept her chin level. She took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and held it in her left hand more as an anchor than a beverage. She was doing fine. She was doing genuinely fine. She found a section of the room near the east wall where the crowd thinned. and she stood there and looked at the other guests' clothing with the practiced eye of someone who could not turn that part of her brain off. The woman in the ivory column gown near the bar had a zipper issue at the left hip that the tailor had tried to disguise by adjusting the drape, but the drape fell wrong under the ballroom lighting. The man in the cobalt tuxedo jacket had paid a great deal of money for something that did not actually fit his shoulders. There was a girl near the floral arrangement in a blush tulle dress that was genuinely beautiful. Clean lines, excellent structure, the kind of work that came from someone who understood proportion. "Is that made by hand?" Amara turned. The woman who had spoken was standing slightly to her left, mid-40s, dark hair pulled into a low twist, wearing a simple black dress that probably cost more than Amara's monthly rent. Her tone was curious, not hostile. She was looking at Amara's neckline embroidery. "The embroidery is," Amara said. "The silk was sourced. I designed the cut." "It's remarkable," the woman said. She meant it. Amara could tell the difference between performance and genuine response. She had been navigating both her entire life. "Who are you with?" "I came with Deshawn Morris, stylist." "Deshawn has a good eye." The woman extended her hand. "Patricia Holm. I'm on the board for the Meridian Arts Foundation." Amara shook her hand and introduced herself, and they spoke for approximately 6 minutes about fabrication techniques and the challenge of sourcing ethical textiles in a market that had largely outsourced its conscience. Patricia Holm had a focused intelligence and a way of listening that felt like being taken seriously, and Amara felt, for the first time since she had arrived, that she was breathing at a normal rate. Then Patricia was called away by someone across the room, and the moment closed. Amara stood alone again near the east wall, and that was when she heard it. It started as laughter, not the polite social laughter of a gala. Something different, something that had an edge to it, a directional quality, the kind of sound that meant it was aimed at something specific. Amara felt it before she fully processed where it was coming from. The particular pitch of that sound reached something deep in her nervous system that had been calibrated over 22 years of being the largest person in most rooms, and her body responded the way it always did, a tightening in the chest, a drop in the stomach, a narrowing of focus. She turned. Isabella Beaumont was 24 years old and had never once in her life doubted that a room belonged to her. She was standing approximately 15 feet away with 3 other women, all of them younger than 30, all of them wearing clothing that communicated wealth without effort, the particular kind of expensive that did not need to announce itself because it had never needed to. Isabella herself was in a champagne-colored gown with a draped neckline, her dark hair loose, her posture the posture of someone who had grown up in rooms like this one and would grow old in rooms like this one, and had never once had to prepare herself on the steps outside before walking in. She was looking at Amara. Not at the dress. At Amara. Amara had experienced this look many times, the particular combination of amusement and contempt that arrived on some people's faces when they decided, in the first second and a half of seeing her, that she was available for their entertainment. It was not always malicious. Sometimes it was simply thoughtless. But Isabella Beaumont's version was not thoughtless. There was deliberateness in her eyes, a calculation, the look of someone who had spotted an opportunity and was deciding how large to make it. "Oh my God," Isabella said, not lowering her voice at all. "Did that woman make that dress herself?" One of the women with her made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a wince. The other 2 simply watched. Amara stayed where she was. Her glass of sparkling water was still in her left hand. She could feel the condensation against her fingers. She focused on that. The physical sensation of cold glass, present and real. The way her grandmother had taught her to find something solid when the world went unsteady. "She did," Isabella said, answering her own question, her voice carrying the particular cruelty of someone who had never once faced a consequence. "You can tell because it looks like a project." Amara did not respond. She had learned, through years of having no good options in moments like this, that silence was not weakness. It was refusal. Refusal to perform the expected reaction. Refusal to give the cruelty the response it needed to be satisfying. But Isabella was not finished. She broke away from her group and walked toward Amara with the specific boldness of someone who had always had the room on their side. She stopped about 3 feet away and looked at Amara openly, the way you look at something in a museum, not a person, an object, her expression carrying that particular mix of pity and entertainment that Amara recognized as the cruelest kind of condescension because it did not even register its own wrongness. "I'm not trying to be mean," Isabella said, which was what people said immediately before they were mean on purpose. "But this is a charity gala. There's a dress code, and whatever that is—" She gestured at the turquoise silk with a small, dismissive motion of two fingers. "It doesn't exactly fit." "The dress code says formal attire," Amar said. Her voice was level. She was genuinely proud of how level it was. "I'm formally attired." Isabella smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Honey, the dress code means something different when you look like that. You understand what I'm saying?" Amara understood exactly what she was saying. The room around them had begun to notice. The small radius of awareness that surrounded any public scene was expanding, heads turning, conversations lowering in volume. The subtle reorientation of bodies that meant people were watching while pretending not to. Amar could feel it the way you feel a temperature change, the way the air in a room shifts before a storm. "I worked for 11 months on this dress," Amar said. "Okay," Isabella said. "I designed the cut. I sourced the fabric. I put in the embroidery by hand using a technique that my grandmother taught me when I was 8 years old." "That's really sweet," Isabella said, and the sweetness in her voice was surgical. "You should be more careful," Amara said. The words came out before she had fully planned them, driven by something in her chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but existed in the territory between them. "About what you choose to make small." Isabella looked at her for a moment. Something passed across her face. Not quite recognition, but something adjacent to it. The faint possibility that she had misjudged the exchange. But it lasted less than 2 seconds. Then the smile returned, and she reached back without looking and took a fresh glass of red wine from the tray of a passing server. And she looked directly at Amara, and she poured it. Not splashed, not an accident. Poured. Deliberately, with the steadiness of someone who had decided. The wine hit the turquoise silk and spread immediately, the deep red blooming across the fabric with the irreversible certainty of something that cannot be undone. It soaked through to Amara's skin. It ran down the embroidered cuffwork along the hem. It destroyed, in under 4 seconds, 11 months of work and the last physical object her grandmother had helped her plan. The room went silent. The string quartet played 2 more bars before they too seemed to register that something had shifted, and their music faded. Amara did not move. She was standing very still with the empty sparkling water glass still in her left hand, and the cold wet silk pressed against her skin and her chest, completely full of something she could not name, something enormous and immovable. And she was counting backward from 10 the way she had been taught, because it was the only tool she had that still worked. Isabella set down the wine glass on a nearby table with a precise, delicate click. "Accidents happen," she said. It was not the cruelest thing she had said that evening, but it was the most dishonest, and somehow that made it worse. Amara stood in the center of that silence. The dress her grandmother helped her dream, destroyed. The room full of people who had watched and said nothing. The count in her chest still going, 7, 6, 5. And she thought, "I will not cry in this room. Whatever else happens tonight, I will not give this room my tears." She did not cry, but she also could not move. There was a particular paralysis that came from being publicly destroyed in front of people who had the power to help and had chosen instead to simply observe, and she was inside it completely, her feet fixed to the marble floor, her body refusing to perform either the fight or the flight that her nervous system was currently voting for. And then the ballroom doors opened. The sound was not dramatic, just the soft mechanical release of the latch, the hinges moving, the doors swinging inward on well-oiled pivots. But the effect on the room was immediate. The heads that had been turned toward Amara shifted. The silence, which had been hers, became something else. Redistributed, suddenly diffused across a larger question. The man who walked in was 40 years old. He was not the largest person in the room, and he was not the loudest, and he was not moving quickly. He walked the way people walked when they had never once in their life needed to prove that they had a right to be somewhere. Black suit, perfectly fitted, the kind of tailoring that existed outside fashion cycles because it was not trying to be fashionable, it was simply correct. Dark hair, short at the sides, a jawline that looked like it had been made to hold a particular kind of stillness, and up his neck, extending toward the left side of his jaw, a dragon tattoo, rendered in traditional Korean style, the lines fine and old and deliberate. Not an ornament, a statement. The kind of marking that meant something to people who knew what it meant and communicated sufficient warning to people who did not. Kang Min-jae looked at the room once, the way a man looks at a room when he is taking inventory rather than seeking approval. Then his eyes found Amara. The wine-soaked dress, the ruined embroidery, the glass still held in her hand. Then he looked at Isabella. He crossed the room without hurrying. The crowd separated for him. Not dramatically, not in a movie way, but in the way that crowds separate when the animal part of the brain registers something that the social part has not yet processed. By the time he reached the space where Amara was standing, the radius around them had grown to perhaps 12 feet, and it was very quiet. He took off his jacket. He set it across Amara's shoulders without asking permission and without ceremony, the way you cover someone who is cold without making an announcement about it. The jacket was warm and it smelled faintly of something, cedar or something like it, and it covered most of the stain. He did not look at Amara when he did this. He was already looking at Isabella. "You didn't destroy a dress tonight," he said. His voice was not raised. It was completely, almost unnaturally, calm. "You destroyed your family's future." Isabella's expression had shifted. The confidence was still there. She was young, and she had never had cause to abandon it quickly. But something underneath it had changed, some foundational certainty that the room belonged to her, that whatever she did in it carried no consequence she would personally feel. "Excuse me?" she said. Her voice was steady, but the tone had changed. It was asking a question it did not fully want answered. Min-jae did not repeat himself. He looked at Amara for the first time since he had entered, directly, not past her, not at the dress, at her face, and what was in his eyes was something that Amara could not immediately categorize. Not pity, not even sympathy exactly. Something older than either of those things. "Go home," he said quietly. "Tonight is over for you. Tomorrow starts something different." Amara looked at him. She did not know this man. She had no reason to trust him, and several instinctive reasons not to. He had a dragon tattooed on his neck, and he had just threatened a billionaire's daughter in a room full of witnesses, and he was looking at her like he knew something about her that she had not yet been told. But the jacket was warm, and she was exhausted, and 11 months of her life was soaking into the marble floor at her feet. She left. She did not look back at Isabella. She did not look back at the room. She walked out of the Bella Vista ballroom with Kang Min-jae's jacket across her shoulders and her head exactly level, her grandmother's count still running quietly in the back of her mind, and the ruined dress pressed cold and wet against her skin. Outside, the night air hit her and she stopped walking and she stood on the top step of the marble entrance and she breathed, just breathed, and she did not cry, and she did not fall apart, and she did not understand any of what had just happened. Behind her, inside the ballroom, she heard nothing, no voices raised, no sound of impact or confrontation, just silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone with actual power enters a room and decides to use it. Amara stood in the night air and she looked at the city spread below the hill where the Bella Vista sat, all those lights, all those windows, all those people living lives she could not see. And she asked herself the question that had been waiting beneath everything else all evening. Who was that man, and why had he looked at her like she was something he recognized? She did not have an answer. But somewhere back inside those doors, Kang Min-jae was standing in front of Richard Beaumont's daughter, and whatever he was saying to her in that quiet, certain voice, Amara understood, with a certainty she could not yet explain, that the answer to her question was already in motion, and it had been in motion, she somehow felt, for much longer than tonight. Min-jae did not move from the center of the ballroom for a long time after Amara left. He stood where he had been standing, in the cleared radius that the crowd had given him without being asked, and he looked at Isabella Beaumont with the particular quality of attention that made people feel examined rather than seen. It was not an aggressive look. That was the thing about it that Isabella could not quite process. There was no heat in it, no visible anger, nothing that her nervous system could categorize as a familiar threat and respond to with the social tools she had spent 24 years developing. It was simply a look of complete, unhurried assessment, and it was worse than anger because she did not know what to do with it. "You don't know who I am," Minjay said. It was not a question. "I know who you are," Isabella said. She was working to keep her voice at its normal register. She almost managed it. "You're Kang Minjay. You run import operations out of Seoul and Vancouver. My father has met you twice." "Your father has met a version of me," Minjay said. "The version I bring to meetings with people like your father." The room was still quiet. The guests who had not already drifted toward the far end of the ballroom were standing close enough to witness but far enough to maintain the fiction that they were not watching. The string quartet had resumed playing something low and unobtrusive, the kind of music designed to fill silence without drawing attention to itself. Isabella's two remaining friends had moved back. Not dramatically. A few steps, the way people move when they want the option to deny they were ever close to something. "Whatever you think happened here," Isabella began. "I know what happened here," Minjay said. "I was watching before I walked in." Isabella's jaw tightened. "She bumped into me. The wine thought Isabella." His use of her first name stopped her mid-sentence with the efficiency of a hand raised. "I have cameras on this room. I have been in this building for 40 minutes. I saw what you did from the moment you noticed her to the moment you poured the glass." He paused. The pause had weight. "Don't try to rewrite it. Not to me." The color in Isabella's face went through two changes. First a flush, then something paler underneath. She was recalibrating, Minjay could see it, running through her internal inventory of leverage and finding it shorter than expected. She was 24 years old, and she had grown up understanding that her family name was a kind of armor, and she was beginning to understand, in the specific way that understanding arrives only when it is too late to be useful, that armor required someone on the other side who was impressed by it. "What do you want?" she asked. Her voice had dropped. The performance quality had left it. "Right now?" Minjay straightened his cuffs. The small, unhurried gesture of a man for whom time was not a resource he was running low on. "Right now I want you to go find your father and tell him exactly what you did. Word for word. Don't edit it." "My father is in San Francisco until Thursday." "He'll be on the phone with me before midnight," Minjay said. "I'd rather he heard it from you first." He turned and walked toward the bar, and the crowd parted for him again, and that was the end of the conversation. And Isabella stood in the middle of the floor she had owned 30 minutes ago and felt, for the first time in her life, the specific vertigo of a room that no longer belonged to her. Richard Beaumont called at 11:47 p.m. Minjay took the call in the hotel's private garden terrace, a stone-flagged space off the east wing that the Bella Vista kept roped off during events. He had a glass of water he was not drinking. The city beyond the garden wall made its low, continuous noise, traffic, wind, the distant compression of a helicopter somewhere over Westwood. "I need to understand what happened tonight," Richard said. His voice had the clipped efficiency of a man who had been rich long enough to believe that efficiency was a virtue rather than a habit. "Isabella called me. She wasn't entirely clear." "She was clear enough," Minjay said. "She humiliated a woman in front of 300 people and destroyed something that woman had worked almost a year to build. Then she lied about it to everyone in the room except me." The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. "I understand it was an incident." "Richard," Minjay set his water glass down on the stone railing. "I've known you 8 years. In 8 years I have never called your daughter's behavior my business. Tonight, it became my business." Another silence. Shorter. "Why?" "That's not a conversation for the phone," Minjay said. "What is a conversation for the phone is what happens next. Your Pacific Rim distribution contracts come up for review in 6 weeks. 3 of the 5 primary suppliers run through operations I have relationships with. Not ownership, relationships. The difference matters, but the practical effect is the same." Richard's breathing changed. Not dramatically, just a barely perceptible shift in the rhythm of it, the kind of change that happened when a man's body understood something before his mind was ready to accept it. "You're not suggesting, but—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Minjay said. "I'm telling you that the woman your daughter humiliated tonight is a gifted designer who has been working her way up from nothing. I'm telling you that she deserves an opportunity that your family's network is entirely capable of providing. And I'm telling you that how your family responds to what happened tonight will determine whether our professional relationship continues to be mutually beneficial. He picked up his water glass again. The city went on making its noise below the garden wall. I'll need a few days, Richard said finally. You have until Monday, Minji said. He ended the call. He stood in the garden for a while after that. The stone was cold under his hands where he gripped the railing. The city lights below were numerous and indifferent, the way city lights always were, and he looked at them without really seeing them, and he thought about a woman in a turquoise dress walking out of a ballroom with his jacket across her shoulders and her head completely level. 29 years old. He had watched her from a distance for 29 years. He had genuinely believed, for most of that time, that the distance was protection, that the absence of him in her life was the thing that kept her safe. He had believed this so thoroughly and for so long that it had become a kind of architecture, a structural element of the way he organized his thinking about himself and what he was and what he owed the world. Standing in the cold garden with the taste of nothing in his mouth, he was less certain. Amara's apartment was in Koreatown, third floor of a building on Ardmore that smelled like cooking oil and old carpet, and the particular combination of human density and urban permanence that Amara had come to associate with the feeling of being home. She had lived there for 4 years. She had painted the kitchen herself, a deep teal that she had mixed from 2 separate cans because neither one was exactly right alone. The sewing machine her grandmother had left her sat in the corner of the living room on a table she had built from reclaimed wood. She found in a dumpster behind a renovation site on Wilshire. She was sitting on her bathroom floor when she heard her phone buzz. She had been sitting on the bathroom floor for approximately 25 minutes. Not because she was unable to get up, she was capable of getting up. She was sitting on the bathroom floor because the bathroom floor was cold and hard, and those 2 qualities currently felt like the most honest things available to her. And sometimes honesty was more useful than comfort. The ruined dress was in the bathtub. She had peeled it off in stages, methodically, trying not to look directly at the stained sections and mostly failing. The wine had dried into the silk in a way that was very clearly permanent. The embroidery along the left cuff was destroyed. The geometric pattern at the neckline had held marginally better, but the fabric beneath it was done. She had not cried. She was noting this as a factual matter, not a point of pride. She had felt, multiple times in the past 2 hours, the specific pressure behind her eyes and in the back of her throat that preceded crying, and each time it had arrived, she had found something physical to focus on instead. The temperature of the tile, the sound of traffic from Ardmore, the weight of her own hands on her knees. And the pressure had receded, and she had remained dry-eyed, and she was not sure whether this was strength or simply a delayed collapse that was waiting for a quieter moment. Her phone buzzed again. She reached for it without getting up from the floor. The message was from a number she did not recognize. It said, "There's a car outside your building. The driver's name is Chen. He works for me. He's not going to take you anywhere you don't want to go. I owe you an explanation and a clean jacket. M." Amara read it twice. Then she read it a third time, slower, as if the meaning might change with additional exposure. She sat on the cold tile and thought about the man in the black suit with the dragon on his neck who had put his jacket across her shoulders without asking permission and told her that tomorrow started something different. She thought about the way the room had parted for him, not dramatically, but inevitably, the way water moves around a stone. She thought about the look in his eyes when he had looked directly at her face. Not pity, not sympathy, something older. And the way that look had unsettled her in a way she still could not precisely name. She typed, "How do you know where I live?" The response came back in under a minute. "I've known where you live for 4 years. I know where you lived before that. I know you painted your kitchen teal because you couldn't find exactly the right color in one can. I'm not a threat to you. I understand if you don't believe that yet." Amara stared at the screen. The tile was very cold under her. She got up off the bathroom floor, washed her face with cold water, looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, her face, her eyes, the slight redness around the rims that was the closest she had gotten to crying. And she went to her closet and put on jeans and a plain black sweater and her good boots. The brown leather ones she had resoled twice because they were too well made to throw away. And she picked up her keys and she went downstairs. The car was a black sedan, clean, understated, the kind of vehicle that did not announce itself. A man was leaning against the driver's side, such mid-30s, compact, wearing a gray jacket, with the particular stillness of someone professionally trained in stillness. He looked up when she came out of the building. "Miss Washington," he said. "I'm Chen." "Where are we going?" Amara said. "Mr. Kang said to ask you that." She looked at him for a moment. He met her eyes without discomfort, without the slight flinching or recalibration that she had learned to recognize as the first sign of someone processing her appearance before they processed her words. He simply waited. "Somewhere with coffee," she said. He nodded and opened the rear door, and she got in. They ended up at a diner on Olympic. Not a fancy place, a real diner, yellow lighting and vinyl seats and a pie display by the register. Minji was already in a booth in the back. He had changed out of the gala suit into dark slacks and a gray shirt, the top button open. Without the suit, without the formal context of the Bella Vista, he looked less like a billionaire's threat and more like a man who had been awake too long and was carrying something heavy in the deliberate way of people who had been carrying heavy things for so long that it had become indistinguishable from posture. He stood when she came in, not ostentatiously, just stood, the reflex of someone with old-fashioned manners, and waited until she had slid into the opposite seat before sitting back down. There was already coffee on the table, black, for him. He gestured at the carafe. "How do you take it?" he said. "What I drink is not the conversation I came here for," Amara said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Fair." Amara put her hands flat on the table and looked at him directly. She had decided, walking from the car to the diner door, that she was going to do this without performance. No constructed composure, no defensive indirection. She was tired, and her grandmother's dress was ruined in her bathtub, and this man had been watching her for 4 years, and apparently longer, and she wanted the truth more than she wanted to seem unaffected. "You said you know where I've lived for 4 years, she said. "You know what color I painted my kitchen? You told a billionaire's daughter that she destroyed her family's future, and you did it because she spilled wine on me." She paused. "Who are you to me?" Min-jae looked at her. He had large hands, she noticed. They were wrapped around his coffee cup, the knuckles prominent, the hands of someone who had used them for more than boardrooms. The dragon tattoo was visible above his collar, the uppermost coil of it. "That's a longer answer than tonight is probably ready for," he said. "Then give me the short version," Amara said. "Give me something true and I'll tell you if I want the rest." He was quiet for a moment. The diner made its noises around them, the clink of a plate, a short burst of laughter from 2 seats down, the low television above the counter showing something neither of them was watching. "I knew your mother," he said. The words landed in the space between them with the weight of words that have been held for a very long time. Amara did not move. "My mother died when I was born." "I know." "You knew her." "Yes." Amara breathed in through her nose. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she had not been 2 seconds ago. "How well?" Min-jae set down his coffee cup. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. "Well enough that losing her was the thing that changed the shape of my life." He said it plainly, without flourish, the way people say things they have had 19 years to find the right words for and have still not quite managed it. Amara sat with that. The diner went on around her. The coffee steamed. "I need you to tell me what that means," she said. "All of it. Not tonight if you say not tonight, but I need you to tell me." "I'll tell you everything," Min-jae said. I've owed you that for a long time. He stopped. He looked at his hands. "I told myself the not telling was protection. I'm not sure anymore that I was right about that." It was the most uncertain thing he had said, and somehow it made him more real to her than anything else. More real than the power he had wielded in the ballroom. More real than the efficiency of his threat to Richard Beaumont. More real than the jacket placed across her shoulders without ceremony. The uncertainty made him human in a way that power could not. She did not ask any more questions that night. She drank the coffee, black, and they sat in the yellow light of the diner on Olympic, and Min-jae told her about the city. Not the mafia city, not the empire he ran, But the Los Angeles he had arrived in 22 years ago, speaking broken English and knowing only 3 people, and how the city had been a kind of violence and a kind of gift simultaneously, and she listened, and she did not know yet what he was to her or what she was to him, but the outline of it was beginning to take shape at the edges of her understanding, the way a room resolves out of darkness as your eyes adjust. She went home at 2 in the morning. She did not sleep for a long time. Across town, in the Beaumont family's Bel Air estate, Isabella Beaumont was in her father's study. She had driven there after the gala rather than wait until Thursday, sitting in the leather chair across from the desk where Richard Beaumont had conducted his most serious business conversations for 30 years. And she was watching her father read a series of messages on his phone with the particular focused silence of a man calculating a loss he had not anticipated. Richard Beaumont was 58 years old and had built his hospitality empire through a combination of genuine business acumen and the specific willingness to ignore costs that other people were unwilling to ignore. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who had made a practice of not looking closely at certain things, and he had raised a daughter without fully appreciating that the practice of not looking was transmissible. He set down the phone. 3 suppliers, he said. I told you. You told me it was an accident, Richard said. His voice was quiet. This was, Isabella had learned over 24 years, a more dangerous register than raised. You called me at 11 o'clock and told me it was an incident and that Kang Min-jae overreacted. He did overreact. He has documentation, Isabella. Richard picked up the phone again and set it back down in the same motion, a gesture of controlled frustration. He told me he has documentation, which means whatever story you were planning to tell becomes irrelevant the moment he produces it. Isabella said nothing. The study was large and dark except for the desk lamp, and in that particular light she looked younger than 24. Not in a soft way, but in the way that people look young when the architecture of their certainty starts to show its actual age. He wants you to use your connections to get that woman a real opportunity, Richard said. The Meridian Group. An interview. Real consideration, not a courtesy. You're asking me to help her? I'm asking you to do exactly what the man who controls 40% of our Pacific Rim supply chain is asking you to do. Richard looked at her. This is not a philosophical conversation. This is a business conversation. It's humiliating, Isabella said. What you did tonight was humiliating, Richard said. What you're being asked to do is correct it. He stood from the desk. Call Vera Stein at the Meridian Group in the morning. Tell her you have a designer you want her to see. Don't explain why. Don't make it about yourself. He walked toward the door of the study, then stopped with his hand on the frame. And Isabella, whatever this woman has made, I want you to actually look at it before you make that call. Not as a favor, as the minimum. He left. Isabella sat alone in the study with the desk lamp and the dark and the particular quality of silence that follows a conversation that cannot be taken back. And she thought about the woman in the turquoise dress and what it would mean to call Vera Stein and what it would mean not to. And she picked up her phone and she went to the name Amara Washington and she searched it, and the first result was a small Instagram account, 400 followers, a series of photographs of handmade garments, the work precise and bold and unmistakably the product of someone who knew what they were doing. And Isabella sat with the phone in her hand and looked at the photographs for a long time. She did not call Vera Stein that night, but she looked at every photograph. 3 days later, Amara received a call from a number with a West Side area code. The woman on the other end introduced herself as an assistant to Vera Stein, head of acquisitions and development at Meridian Fashion Group, and the assistant said that Ms. Stein had been made aware of Amara's work and was interested in scheduling an introductory meeting. Amara was standing in her kitchen when the call came in. She had a piece of pattern paper rolled out across the counter and a marking pen in her hand, and she was 3 hours into a project she had started to keep herself from thinking about everything else. And when the assistant said Meridian Fashion Group, the marking pen stopped moving and she stood very still. Meridian was not a mid-tier opportunity. Meridian was the room beyond the room, the kind of company whose name appeared in the credits of major runway shows, whose development roster had launched 6 designers in the past decade, who were now showing at the level where their names became shorthand. Getting a meeting with Vera Stein was the kind of thing that happened after years and introductions and the right kind of accumulated visibility. It did not happen because of a pop-up market in Silver Lake and a small Instagram account. "How did Ms. Stein hear about my work?" Amara asked. "I believe through a referral," the assistant said. "Ms. Stein doesn't always share her sourcing." Amara said yes to the meeting. She said yes in a completely steady voice and wrote down the date and thanked the assistant and ended the call, and then she stood in her kitchen with the marking pen still in her hand and looked at the teal wall and thought about doors and who opens them and whether it matters. At the end of it, whose hand was on the handle. She thought about the dragon tattoo. She thought about the diner on Olympic and a man saying, "I knew your mother," with the specific weight of someone saying it for the first time after a very long silence. She picked up her phone and opened a new message to the number she had saved under the letter M, and she typed, "I got a call from Meridian today. Was that you?" The response came back in 4 minutes. "The door was already there. I just made sure it wasn't locked." Amara looked at the message for a long time. She typed, "I need to know who you are to me before this goes any further. Whatever this is." She sent it. She set the phone down on the counter next to the pattern paper. The response, when it came, was not what she expected. It was not a deflection or a reassurance or the kind of careful non-answer that powerful men used when they wanted to control the timing of information. It was 3 words, and they were the 3 words that changed everything that came after. The 3 words that meant there was no longer any version of the future in which Amara Washington did not know the truth about Kang Min-jae, and no longer any version of the past in which the distance between them could be called accidental. I am your father. Part 3. Cuộc kích ban điện ảnh này được triển khai với dung lượng 3.500 đến 4.000 từ. Bắt đầu trực tiếp từ điểm kết thúc của Part 2, yêu cầu bắt đầu ngay lập tức từ điểm không còn đường lùi của phần trước. Trọng tâm của phần này là bước ngoặt lớn, the twist. Một sự thật kinh hoàng bị phơi bày hoặc một sự phản bội bất ngờ khiến toàn bộ kế hoạch của nhân vật chính bị phá hủy hoàn toàn. Duy trì dòng văn mỹ thô ráp, giàu cảm xúc, không sáo rộng. Hãy kể theo ngôi thứ 3, tập trung khai thác sự bàng hoàng, tuyệt vọng và những phản ứng tâm lý cực đoan của nhân vật khi đối mặt với thất bại. Hội thoại phải sắc lạnh, mang tính chất thẩm vấn hoặc bộc phát sự phẫn nộ. Triển khai chi tiết từng phân cảnh, scene by scene với nhịp điệu dồn dập, tuyệt đối không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng, tiêu đề phụ hay nhắc đến thực thể tôn giáo. Kết thúc phần 3 bằng một tình huống ngặt nghèo nhất, buộc nhân vật phải thay đổi hoàn toàn bản chất để tồn tại. Hãy trình bày trực tiếp trong tin nhắn, viết cực kỳ chi tiết từng cử chỉ nhỏ. Nếu đặt giới hạn phản hồi, hãy dừng lại ở một câu rạng rỡ để tôi ra lệnh viết tiếp nhằm giữ độ sâu cho kịch bản lồng tiếng. Chỉ dân bắt buộc. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu nhằm mục đích giải trí, không dựa trên bất kỳ sự kiện hay nhân vật có thật nào. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng. Nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dùng giữa câu, hãy viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh không mở rộng nội dung. Let our show more. Amara read the message 4 times. Not because the words were complicated. 3 words were not complicated. 3 words were, in fact, the simplest possible configuration of the English language for the thing they were communicating, and that simplicity was part of what made them so difficult to absorb. There was no ambiguity to hide inside, no possible alternative reading, no grammatical escape hatch. The words said exactly what they said, and they meant exactly what they meant, and Amara stood in her kitchen with the marking pen still in her right hand and the pattern paper still rolled out across the counter and the teal wall in front of her, and she read the message a 5th time. I am your father. She set the phone down. She picked up the marking pen and put a mark on the pattern paper. Not a deliberate mark, just the mark that happened when a hand that was holding something made contact with a surface without direction behind it. A small dark line about 2 centimeters long, diagonal, meaning nothing. She looked at the mark. Then she picked up the phone and called the number. It rang twice. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he had been holding the phone. Say it again, she said. Her voice was completely flat. She had not made any decision about tone. It had simply arrived that way, the way the body sometimes makes decisions before the mind catches up. Amara, say it again out loud. The thing you just typed. A pause. She could hear him breathing. Then, "I am your father." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator made its low mechanical hum. Outside on Ardmore, a car went by with its radio on. Something with bass in it, there and then gone. "You need to come here," she said. "Tonight." "It's almost tonight," she said. "Or I spend the next week building a version of this that I made up myself, and I promise you it will be worse than the truth." Another pause, shorter. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. She ended the call. She did not move from the kitchen for a while. She stood at the counter with her hands flat on the pattern paper, and she looked at the teal wall and she breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the count her grandmother had given her. And she thought about her grandmother, Clara Washington, the woman who had raised her from birth, the woman who had taught her the sewing machine and the color mixing and the geometric embroidery patterns and the breathing count and the particular brand of steady courage that Clara called not letting the world make you small. The woman who had told Amara, every time Amara asked about her father, that some questions had answers that needed more time before they were ready to be true. She thought about those conversations differently now. The careful way Clara had deflected, the specific phrasing, more time before they were ready, which she had always taken as her grandmother's poetic way of saying she didn't know. She understood now that it had not been poetry. Clara had known. Clara had known, and she had said more time, and now Clara was 4 years dead, and Amara was standing in the kitchen Clara had never seen, and there was a man 40 minutes away who had been watching her for 29 years. She washed her face. She made tea she did not drink. She sat on the couch in the living room with the sewing machine in the corner and the tea going cold on the table in front of her, and she waited. He knocked at 43 minutes. She had been counting. She opened the door. He was wearing the dark slacks and gray shirt from the diner, or something indistinguishable from them, and he looked the same as he had looked 3 days ago. The same controlled stillness, the same weight behind the eyes, except that he looked, she thought, slightly less certain than he had looked then, and that small reduction in certainty was more visible on his face than uncertainty had any right to be on a face that had spent 40 years learning not to show things. She stepped back from the door. He came in. He looked at the apartment the way she had noticed he looked at rooms. Inventory, not approval. His eyes moved across the sewing machine, the teal kitchen wall, the pattern paper still rolled out on the counter with the meaningless diagonal mark on it. He did not comment on any of it. She sat in the chair across from the couch. She left him the couch. She did not offer tea. "How long have you known where I was?" she said. "Since you were born." "You knew where I was every year I was growing up?" "Yes." "You knew where I was when I was 7 and the kids at school?" She stopped. She had not planned to say that. She started again. "You knew where I was when I was in high school?" "Yes." "When I was at the community college? When I was working alterations in that shop on Crenshaw that paid me $11 an hour? When I was—" She stopped again, and this time the stopping was different, a wall she hit at speed. "You knew where I was every single time?" "Yes," he said. He was not looking away from her. She had half expected him to, the way people looked away when they were receiving a deserved accounting. But he was looking directly at her, and the directness of it was not defiance. It was something closer to the decision to take what was coming without flinching, because flinching would be the one thing more dishonest than the absence he was already answering for. "And you never came," Amara said. "No." "Why?" The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Not a question, exactly. More like the verbal form of the accusation that had been building in her chest since she had read 3 words on a phone screen in a kitchen in Koreatown. Min-jae put his hands on his knees. He looked at them for a moment, those large, prominent-knuckled hands, and then back at her. "Because I am what I am," he said. "The things I run, the people I deal with, the way my world operates." He paused. "There are people who would use you, to reach me, to pressure me, to punish me. A daughter, in my world, a daughter is not just a person. She's a target." "So you decided for me," Amara said. "You decided I was safer not knowing." "I decided you were safer not being known," he said. "There's a difference." "There isn't," she said immediately. "There really isn't. You kept me safe from your world by keeping me in a world where I had nothing. You gave me Clara and an apartment, and poverty, and invisibility, and you called that protection." Clara was... Clara's dead, Amar said. The word landed clean and hard. She has been dead for 4 years. And for 4 years I have been completely alone, and you knew where I was, and you watched, and you did nothing until a 24-year-old girl poured wine on my dress at a party. The room held that. Minji did not attempt to answer it immediately. He sat with it the way you sit with something that is accurate and therefore unanswerable, and the silence between them was not empty. It had texture, the accumulated weight of 29 years of a choice being named out loud for the first time by the person that choice had been made about. "She's not wrong," he said finally, and it took Amara a half-second to realize he was talking about her, about himself seeing her with clarity. "Everything you just said is right." "I know it's right," she said. "What I need to know is whether you understand what it cost." He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me," he said. She looked at him. "Don't do that. Don't ask me to do your understanding for you. You were there. You watched. You already know what it cost." Another silence. Longer. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. The city made its noises outside. "Your mother's name was Naomi," he said. Not a deflection, Cha. She could tell the difference. He was trying to find a door into the truth that was large enough to walk through. "She was 23 when I met her. She was painting murals in the warehouse district downtown, before that neighborhood became what it is now. She had a commission for $40, and she was painting something 15 feet high, and she was doing it alone at 11 o'clock at night." Something in his voice changed on the word alone, a small compression, barely audible. "I was not a good man when I met her. I was already building what I've built. I already had blood on my hands in the ways that this life produces blood on your hands." Amara did not move. "She knew what I was," he said. "She wasn't naive. She made her own decision, and I will not, I have never, reduced her to someone who didn't know what she was choosing. She chose me clearly." He stopped. "She died 14 hours after you were born. Hemorrhage. There was nothing—" He stopped again. The stopping was different from the earlier pauses. This one had a physical quality to it, like something pressing on a bruise. "There was nothing anyone could do." Amara's hands were in her lap. She was aware of them the way you become aware of your hands when you are trying not to use them to do something. Grip the edge of the chair, press against your own sternum, something. "I held you," he said, "in the hospital, for about 20 minutes before Clara came." He looked at his hands. "I looked at you and I thought, you look so much like her. And I thought, I cannot be in this child's life. I cannot bring my world into her life. And I thought, I'll watch. I'll make sure. I'll protect from the outside and that will be enough." "It wasn't enough," Amar said. "No," he said. "It wasn't." They sat in the apartment until after 3 in the morning. He told her about Naomi, the mural, the laugh that was apparently too loud for most rooms and exactly right for all of them, the way she had talked about art as a form of argument rather than a form of beauty. He told her about the first years of watching Amara from a distance, the specific torture of watching a child grow up and not being able to respond to any of it. He told her about the times he had the word almost appeared several times, trailing off into the specific silence of choices not made. She listened. She did not forgive him. She did not say she forgave him, and she did not perform softness she did not feel. But she listened, and somewhere in the listening, the wall between them shifted, did not come down, but shifted, the way a wall shifts when the structure behind it changes. He left at 3:15. At the door, he stopped. "The Meridian meeting," he said. "That was real. Vera Stein looked at your work. Isabella arranged the introduction, but what Stein saw she responded to genuinely. Whatever happens between us, that is yours." Amara looked at him. "And the dress, the package." Something crossed his face. "That comes later. There's more to that story." She nodded once. He left. She locked the door and stood with her back against it and breathed, just breathed, and the apartment was quiet around her and the sewing machine sat in the corner like the most permanent thing in the room, the thing her grandmother had left her, the thread between then and now. The Meridian meeting was in 9 days. She spent 7 of those days working, Not processing, not recovering, not sitting with the enormity of what had happened, working. She pulled 3 pieces from her current portfolio and rebuilt 2 of them from the cutting stage. Because looking at them with fresh eyes, she saw places where she had compromised the line to save material costs, and those compromises were visible if you knew what to look for, and Vera Stein would know what to look for. She sourced 2 new fabric samples from a supplier in the arts district and built a 4th piece that she had been drafting in her head for 6 weeks. A coat, structured at the shoulders, with a lining made from fabric printed with a pattern she had designed herself, derived from the geometric embroidery her grandmother had taught her. The coat took 60 hours. She slept in 4-hour intervals and drank too much coffee and ate whatever was already in the apartment because leaving to buy food took time she did not have. On the 8th day, she spread everything out across the living room floor and looked at it. It was good. She knew it was good in the specific way that you know your own work is good, not with arrogance, but with the quiet certainty of someone who has spent enough hours in a craft to recognize when the thing in front of them is operating at its actual capacity rather than below it. The coat was genuinely exceptional. She could see that clearly, and seeing it clearly made her chest do something complicated. Pride and grief, and the particular loneliness of having something to show and no one to show it to. She thought about calling Min Jae. She did not call Min Jae. She called Deshaun instead. He came over and looked at everything with the focused, critical eye of someone whose professional survival depended on accurate aesthetic assessment, and he walked around the coat for approximately 90 seconds without speaking, and then he said, "Amara, what the hell?" And she said, "Is that good?" And he said, "Where has this been?" And she said, "Inside me, I think." And he said, "Bring all of it, the coat especially. Lead with the coat." She went to the Meridian meeting on the 9th day. The Meridian Fashion Group occupied 2 floors of a building in Century City. Not ostentatious, but precise, the kind of space that communicated its own seriousness without effort. The receptionist brought her to a conference room with good north light and a long table and asked if she wanted water, and Amara said yes because her mouth was dry. And then she set up her pieces on the hanging rail they had provided, and she stood next to them and she waited. Vera Stein was 51 years old, originally from Chicago, and had the bearing of someone who had made 10,000 aesthetic judgments, and been right about enough of them to have earned the particular confidence that comes not from certainty, but from a long track record of trusting your own eye. She came into the conference room with a younger associate and a notepad, and she looked at Amara once, and then she looked at the work. She looked at the work for a long time. She started at the left end of the rail and moved right, slowly, occasionally reaching out to touch a seam or lift a hem or examine a lining. She did not speak for the first several minutes. The associate made notes. Amara stood near the window and kept her hands still and breathed through her nose. When Stein reached the coat, she stopped. She looked at it from 3 feet, then 2, then she turned it on the hanger to examine the back construction. Then she looked at the lining, and her face did not change dramatically, but something in her posture shifted. A slight forward lean, almost imperceptible. The body registering interest before the professional face was ready to commit to it. "Tell me about this pattern," Stein said, indicating the lining. "It's derived from a traditional embroidery technique," Amar said. "My grandmother taught it to me. I adapted the geometry for print, adjusted the scale ratios for the interior scale of a coat lining specifically." "Why interior?" "Because the person wearing it knows it's there," Amara said. "It doesn't need to perform for the room. It performs for the wearer." Stein looked at her for the first time since entering the room. Really looked, the way she had looked at the coat. "Say that again." "The lining doesn't need the room to see it. The coat is for the room. The lining is for the person inside it." Stein was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How quickly can you produce a 6-piece collection?" Amara felt the floor shift slightly under her, not physically, but in the way that everything shifts when a door that you have been approaching for years suddenly opens while you are still 2 steps away and not quite ready for the air that comes through it. "Define quickly," she said, because the steadiness of her voice required her to say something functional, and that was the most functional thing available. 6 months, Stein said. "Yes," Amar said. "I can do that. I'll need a proposal in 3 weeks. Budget, sourcing plan, timeline." "You'll have it in 2, Amar said. Stein almost smiled. "Good." She handed the coat back to the associate and picked up her notepad. I'll have my contracts team reach out by end of week. We'll discuss terms. She moved toward the door and then paused, half-turned. Ms. Washington, who referred you to us? Amara had thought about this moment. She had thought about it on the drive over and in the elevator, and in the 90 seconds she had spent looking at the north light in the conference room before Stein arrived. She had thought about the answer to this question and what it meant and what it would cost and what it would cost not to know, and she had arrived at something that was not quite a decision, but was the closest thing to a decision she had. Someone who knew my mother, she said. Stein held her gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and left. Amara stood in the conference room with the coat on the rail and the good north light coming through the window, and her hands finally, not entirely steady, and she let them be unsteady because there was no one in the room to see it, and she looked at the coat. The 60 hours of it, the geometry her grandmother had taught her, printed into the lining where only the wearer would feel it. And she allowed herself, for approximately 45 seconds, to feel the full size of what had just happened. Then she packed everything up. She was in the elevator going down when her phone rang. Unknown number. Not Min Jae's number, not Deshawn, not the Meridian Contracts team. She almost didn't answer. She answered on the last ring before voicemail. Ms. Washington. The voice was male, mid-range, with an accent she couldn't immediately place, something mid-Pacific, Korean inflection under American syntax. My name is not important. What's important is that you understand something about the man who arranged your meeting today. Amar's hand tightened on the phone. The elevator reached the lobby. She stepped out and moved to the side of the lobby, away from the foot traffic. Who is this? Someone who has worked with Kang Min Jae for 11 years and watched what happens to the people who become important to him. A pause. His interest in you is not what he's told you it is. You don't know what he's told me. I know he told you he's your father, the voice said. The lobby was cool and bright and full of people going about their ordinary business, and Amara stood in the middle of it with the phone against her ear and the hanging rail of her clothes in her other hand and something cold moving through her chest. How do you know that? She said. Because Kang Min Jae has said he was the father of Naomi Washington's child to 3 different people in the past 11 years, the voice said. And Naomi Washington had 2 other men in her life in the year before she died, both of whom he has also told this story to. Another pause. He uses it, Ms. Washington, the paternity. He uses it to establish loyalty in people he wants close to him, to create obligation, to build a relationship that feels like family, so that when he needs something from you, the ask comes wrapped in something you can't refuse. The lobby went on around her, the normal world, going normally. I don't believe you, Amara said. Her voice was still flat. She noticed this about herself, so that her voice went flat when things became very large, as though her body rationed its expressive resources for moments when they would not be overwhelmed. You don't have to believe me now, the voice said. I'm sending you a file. Documents. Medical records from the hospital where you were born. The paternity filing that was never completed. And a list of the other people he has told this story to. A brief pause. Look at the file, then decide what you believe. The call ended. Amara stood in the Century City lobby with her phone in her hand and the normal world going on around her and the file notification already appearing on her screen, a secure link, no sender name. And she looked at it for a long time. The coat was in the bag in her other hand, the lining with her grandmother's geometry printed into it. 60 hours of work. Vera Stein saying 6-piece collection and contracts team and end of week. Everything she had worked toward, arrived at, standing on the threshold of. And underneath all of it, suddenly the possibility, not the certainty, but the specific nauseating possibility, that the man who had unlocked the door was not who he said he was, and that the lock itself had been placed there by the same hand that was now offering her the key. She opened the file. The file took 11 seconds to load. Amara stood in the Century City lobby and watched the progress bar and counted the seconds without meaning to, the way the mind reaches for something measurable when everything else has become unsteady. 11 seconds. Then the file opened and she was looking at a scanned document, hospital letterhead, Los Angeles County General, the date in the upper right corner corresponding to the year of her birth. And she read it standing there with the hanging rail in one hand and the phone in the other, and people moving past her on both sides going about the ordinary business of a Tuesday afternoon. The document was a birth record supplement. It listed Naomi Washington, age 23, as the mother. Under father, the field read, unknown, paternity not established at time of filing. Amara scrolled. The second document was a private lab record dated 8 months after her birth. A paternity test. The tested individual was listed by initials only, KM, and the result column read, exclusion, probability of paternity, 0.00%. She stopped scrolling. She looked up from the phone and looked at the lobby, the marble floors, the glass facade, the people in their ordinary Tuesday clothes doing their ordinary Tuesday things, and she breathed in once through her nose, and the breath shook slightly on the way in, and she let it shake because there was no one watching and it did not matter. Then she looked back at the file. There were 4 more documents. She read all of them standing in the lobby for 11 minutes, while the hanging rail grew heavier in her hand, and the Century City afternoon went on outside the glass without her. The third document was a series of messages, printed, not screenshotted, printed on paper and then scanned, the kind of evidence someone had been building deliberately for a long time. The messages were between Min Jae and a man identified only as Park, and they were in Korean, but below each exchange was a translation in italics, and the translations described, in the clipped functional language of 2 men conducting business, the strategic value of establishing a paternal relationship with the daughter of Naomi Washington as a means of creating a loyalty asset within the American fashion and arts community. The phrase loyalty asset appeared twice. Amara's name appeared once, in parentheses, following the phrase, the Washington girl. The fourth document was a list, 6 names. Women, all of them, ranging in age from late 20s to early 40s, with cities and professions listed beside each name. A photographer in Seattle, a gallery owner in Miami, a textile artist in New York, 3 others. And beside each name, in the same column, the same phrase, paternity claim, unverified, relationship established. The fifth document was a photograph. Min Jae, perhaps 5 years younger than he looked now, at a table in what appeared to be a restaurant, with a woman Amara did not recognize, mid-30s, dark hair, looking at him the way people looked at someone they had decided to trust. The caption beneath the photograph, handwritten on what appeared to be a printed label, read, Seoul, 2019. Subject told Park Jisoo he was her biological father. Relationship maintained for 14 months before termination. The sixth document was a financial record. Wire transfers, a series of them, from a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands to an account at a Los Angeles bank. The transfers spanned 4 years. The amounts were not enormous, several $100s monthly, occasionally more, consistent with what someone might describe as quiet, ongoing support. The receiving account number matched nothing Amara could verify standing in a lobby, but the transfer notations each contained the same reference code, and at the top of the page, someone had written in red ink, Amara Washington, maintenance payments, control infrastructure. She closed the file. She stood in the lobby. The hanging rail was very heavy now. Her shoulder ached from holding it. She shifted it to her other hand, and she looked at the glass facade of the building and the Century City afternoon beyond it, and she thought about a man sitting across from her in a diner on Olympic, saying, I knew your mother with the weight of something held for a long time. And she thought about his hands on the coffee cup, and she thought about the jacket placed across her shoulders in the ballroom without asking permission, and she thought about 3 words on a phone screen at 2 in the morning, and she thought about the coat with her grandmother's geometry in the lining. And she thought about Vera Stein saying 6-piece collection and contracts team and the particular way a door opens when you have been approaching it for years. She thought about loyalty asset. She thought about the Washington girl. She walked out of the building into the afternoon air, and she found Chen parked at the curb. Minji had sent him, of course. Minji had sent him. The car was always there. The infrastructure was always in place. And she looked at the sedan, and she looked at Chen standing beside it with his professional stillness, and she said, I need you to take me somewhere. Of course, Chen said. Where? To him, she said. Take me to wherever he is right now. Opens when you have been approaching it for years. She thought about loyalty asset. She thought about the Washington girl. She walked out of the building into the afternoon air, and she found Chen parked at the curb. Minji had sent him, of course. Minji had sent him. The car was always there, the infrastructure was always in place. And she looked at the sedan and she looked at Chen standing beside it with his professional stillness, and she said, "I need you to take me somewhere." "Of course," Chen said. "Where?" "To him," she said. "Take me to wherever he is right now." Chen's stillness shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression, gone before it fully formed. "Ms. Washington, Mr. Kang is in a meeting until—" "I don't care," she said. "Take me there or I'll get there myself. And if I get there myself, I won't be as quiet about it." Chen took her there. Minjai's office was not what she had expected, though she could not have said precisely what she had expected. It was on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Los Angeles. Not ostentatious, nothing that announced itself, the kind of space that communicated money through quality rather than scale. Clean lines, good furniture, a view of the city that on another day would have been remarkable. There were two men in the outer office who looked at Amara the way security looked at unexpected arrivals, with a rapid professional assessment that concluded in the same beat that Chen was with her, and therefore she was permitted. Minji came out of the inner office when Chen spoke to someone at the door. He was in a different suit, charcoal, perfectly fitted, and he looked at Amara once and something moved behind his eyes, a fast reading of her face, and whatever he read there made him turn to the men in the outer office and say something brief in Korean, and they left the room. Chen left with them. The outer office was empty. Amara set the hanging rail down against the wall. She set her bag down beside it. She put her phone in her jacket pocket. She did all of these things with deliberate precision, the way you set things down when you need your hands free and your mind fully present, and then she turned to face him. "I got a call," she said, "in the lobby of the Meridian building. A man who said he'd worked with you for 11 years. Min Jae was very still. "He sent me a file," she said. "Documents. A paternity test from the year I was born showing 0 probability. Messages between you and someone named Park about the strategic value of establishing a paternal relationship with me. A list of 6 other women you've told the same story to." She stopped. "And payments. 4 years of wire transfers to an account in Los Angeles, described as control infrastructure." The room was very quiet. "Say something," she said. Minjae looked at her. He was not performing composures. She had enough experience of him now to understand the difference between performed stillness and genuine stillness. And this was genuine, which was the most disorienting part of it, because a man who had just been exposed should not have been that still. "Who sent the file?" he said. "I told you," she said. "A man who said he worked with you." "His voice," Minji said. "Describe his voice." "That's what you're asking me right now?" Her voice stayed flat. She was going to keep it flat. She had decided. "I just told you I have documents showing you fabricated a paternity claim, and you're asking me to describe a voice?" "Because the file is fabricated," he said. The words landed in the room, and she looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them moved. "Say that again," she said. It was what she had said to him 3 days ago on the phone, demanding he repeat, "I am your father." And she heard the echo of it, and she thought there was something profoundly cruel about the way this conversation was mirroring that one. "The file is fabricated," he said. "All of it. The paternity test, the messages, the list of women, the payment records. It is constructed intelligence. Someone built it to break what is developing between us." "And why would someone do that?" she said. "Because I have enemies," he said. "I have operated in this city for 20 years in the way that I operate, and I have accumulated enemies in the way that this kind of life accumulates enemies, and one of them has decided that the most effective way to damage me right now is through you." "Through me?" she said. "Through what I feel for you," he said, "which is real. Whatever that file says, what I feel is real." Amara looked at him for a long moment. She was aware of her own breathing, slightly too fast, not quite controlled, the chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with the coat or the meeting or the number of hours she had been awake. She was aware of the window and the city below it and the hanging rail against the wall with 60 hours of her life on it. "Prove it," she said. "The paternity? Prove it to me right now. I can have a verified test in 72 hours. "That's not right now." Amara, Don't say my name like that, she said, and for the first time the flatness cracked, just slightly, a hairline fracture in the surface of it. Don't say it like you've been saying it your whole life. You've been saying it for 3 days. I've known you for 3 days. I don't know which version of this is true, and I don't know who you actually are. And I don't know if the door you opened at Meridian was genuine generosity or the beginning of an obligation I haven't agreed to yet. And I need you to understand that I cannot. She stopped. I cannot afford to be wrong about this. The last sentence came out quieter than the rest. Not softer, quieter. There was a difference. It was the sentence beneath all the other sentences, the one that contained the actual truth of the moment, that she had been alone for long enough and had survived alone for long enough that the cost of being wrong about a person who claimed to love her had become something she was not sure she could pay a second time. Min Jae crossed the room. He did not touch her. He stopped approximately 4 feet away, which was close enough to be present and far enough to not be a pressure, and he looked at her with the same look he had given her in the ballroom, the one she had been unable to categorize, the one that was older than sympathy, and he said, I know I have no right to ask you to trust me. I know I have given you nothing that earns that. The 3 days you've known me are 3 days, and my 29 years of choosing absence are 29 years, and there is no exchange rate between those things that works in my favor. He paused. But I'm asking you not to make a permanent decision based on a document from a man who needs you to break contact with me. 72 hours. Let me give you something real. Amara looked at him. Her hands were in her jacket pockets. She had put them there without noticing, the body's habit of bracing. Who is Park? She said. Something changed in his face. Where did you hear that name? The messages in the file. Between you and someone named Park. Discussing me as a... She stopped. The phrase was still in her chest like something sharp. As a loyalty asset. Minju was quiet for a moment that lasted slightly too long. Park Sung-jin, he said. He worked with me for 11 years, present tense until 8 months ago. Past tense now, because he decided that what I had built was more valuable than his share of it, and he spent 14 months positioning himself to take it. So he's real, Amara said. He's real. And the messages were real conversations, Min Jae said, that have been edited, recontextualized, the translations altered. He held her gaze. Park knows everything about me. He knows about Naomi. He knows about you. He has known about you for 11 years because I trusted him enough to tell him, and that trust is the single greatest mistake of my professional life. His jaw tightened. He built a file using real names and real dates and manufactured context because he knows that the truth and a well-constructed lie look identical when you don't know which is which. Amara pulled her phone out of her pocket. She opened the file again. She found the photograph. The woman in the restaurant, the handwritten label, Seoul, Seoul 2019. Subject told Park Jisoo he was her biological father, and she turned the screen to face him. Who is she? She said. Min Jae looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a moment, and then he looked at Amara, and something in his face was different now. Not the controlled stillness, not the weight of a man carrying something old, but something rawer and more immediate. The expression of a person who has been outmaneuvered in a way they did not anticipate and is registering the full architecture of it for the first time. Her name is Park Jisoo, he said quietly. She is Park Sung-jin's sister. Amara stared at him. He sent his own sister, Minji said, to meet me, to become... We spent 4 months in a relationship that I believed was genuine. And during those 4 months, she had access to my personal records, my communications, documents I kept outside my professional infrastructure because I believed they were safe. He stopped. When I found out what she was, I ended everything. The relationship, the professional partnership, everything. That was 8 months ago. And the caption on the photograph, Amara said, the one that says you told her you were her biological father. I never said that to her, he said. I never said that to anyone except you. The file says 6 women. The file is constructed to make you believe that what I told you is a pattern rather than the truth, he said. Because if you believe it is a pattern, you leave. And if you leave, The thing I have that he cannot take from me is gone. Amara lowered the phone. She looked at the window. The city below was entirely indifferent, as cities always were. And she stood in the 14th floor office of a man who was either the father she had never had or an exceptionally sophisticated architect of manipulation, and she did not know which was true, and the not knowing was its own particular violence. Not the sharp violence of a clear betrayal, but the grinding violence of suspended certainty, the inability to place your weight anywhere because you did not know which surfaces would hold. "I need to go home," she said. "Amara, I heard what you said," she said. "I am not deciding anything right now. I need to go home, and I need to think, and I need 72 hours the same as you do." She picked up her bag. She picked up the hanging rail. "But I need you to understand something before I leave." She turned to face him one final time. "If the file is real," she said, "I will not see you again. Not because of anger, because I cannot afford what it would cost me to stay in proximity to someone who manufactures family as a tool." She paused. "And if the file is fabricated, and you are who you say you are, then you have an enemy who knows how to reach me and who is willing to use me as a pressure point against you. And that means I'm in danger. Not the kind of danger you protected me from for 29 years by staying away, the kind of danger that found me anyway." She held his gaze. "So either way, you owe me the truth, not the version that makes you look best. The actual truth." He said nothing. He was looking at her with the look she had never been able to name, and she thought now that she understood it slightly better. It was the look of someone who has spent a very long time wanting to be known and has finally arrived at the moment when being known and being exposed have become the same thing. She left. In the elevator going down, she stood with the hanging rail in her bag and the coat with her grandmother's geometry in the lining, and she looked at her reflection in the brushed steel of the elevator doors. And she looked different than she had looked going up. Not older exactly, but changed in the way that a few specific hours could change you when they contained enough compressed truth. The elevator opened into the lobby. Chen was waiting. She walked past him. "I don't need the car," she said. "Miss Washington," he said. Mr. Kang asked. "I know what he asked," she said. "Tell him I'll be in touch." She walked out into the Los Angeles afternoon, and she started walking, not toward anything specific, just walking, because movement was the one thing available to her that did not require a decision. And she walked 3 blocks before she stopped at a corner and leaned against a building and put her face up toward the sky, which was white and enormous, the particular Los Angeles white sky of late afternoon, and she breathed. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Different unknown number than the morning's call. Different area code, different cadence of digits. She stared at it for 2 rings and then answered. "Miss Washington." A woman's voice this time, low, measured, the kind of voice that had been trained into calmness. "My name is Detective Reyes, LAPD Organized Crime Division. I understand you've recently come into contact with an individual named Kang Min Jai. I'm hoping you might be willing to come in and have a conversation with us." Amara closed her eyes. The city went on around her. Traffic, wind, someone's radio, a child somewhere laughing at something. And she stood on the corner with her eyes closed and the coat in her hand, and the question she had been carrying for 3 days suddenly doubled in weight. Not just who is this man and what does he want from me, but now, inescapably, what does it mean that the police already know his name and mine in the same sentence, and what has she already, without knowing it, become part of, and whether the door that had opened for her at Meridian was the beginning of something real or the first room in a building whose exits she had not yet found. Amara did not go to the police that afternoon. She stood on the corner for a long time after the call ended, long enough that the white sky began to take on the first pale suggestion of color that came before actual sunset. And she thought about what Detective Reyes had said, and what she had not said, and the specific quality of a voice that had been trained into calmness, and what kind of training produced that specific quality. She had known, growing up in South Los Angeles, the difference between police who came to help and police who came to collect information. And the difference was not always visible in the first 30 seconds of contact, but it was almost always audible, and what she had heard in Reyes's voice was not the sound of someone calling to offer assistance. She typed a message to Minjae. LAPD Organized Crime just called me. Detective Reyes, she knows your name and mine together. Tell me what that means. The response came back in under 2 minutes. Don't meet with her alone. Don't meet with her at all until we talk. Where are you? She looked at the message. Then she typed, working on trusting you is not the same as trusting you. I'll call you tonight. She took a rideshare home. In the apartment, she put the coat away carefully, hung it properly on the rail in the corner of the bedroom, rather than leaving it in the bag, because the coat deserved that regardless of everything else. She washed her face. She ate something she did not taste. She sat at the kitchen table with her phone, and she opened the file again and she went through it methodically a second time, the way she went through a garment when she was checking construction. Not looking for what she expected to find, but looking for what was actually there. The third time through, she found it. The hospital document, the birth record supplement, had a case number in the upper right corner. She stared at it. Something about the format was wrong, and it took her several minutes to identify what. The case number was 9 digits, and she had seen enough administrative documents in her life, had filed enough paperwork for city arts grants and small business licenses to know that Los Angeles County case numbers from that year used a 7-digit format. Someone had generated the document using a current template. She went back to the paternity test. The lab letterhead was from a company called Pacific Diagnostic Services. She searched the name. The company had been founded in 2009. She had been born in 1996. She sat back in her chair. She looked at the teal wall. Then she called Min Jae. He answered before the first ring completed. Where are you? Home, she said. The file is fabricated. The hospital document uses the wrong case number format for the year. The lab on the paternity test didn't exist until 13 years after I was born. A pause. You checked. I'm a designer, she said. I check construction. Tell me about Reyes. She heard him breathe. Elena Reyes has been building a case against my operations for 3 years. She is methodical and she is patient and she is not corrupt, which makes her considerably more dangerous than the ones who are. Another breath. She has been looking for a point of access. Someone connected to me who is not inside my organization. Someone clean, someone credible. Someone who could provide testimony or documentation without the contamination of being part of what she's investigating. Someone like a daughter, Amara said. Yes. Did Park give her my name? Almost certainly, he said. Park wants 2 things. He wants my operation and he wants me destroyed. Reyes wants me prosecuted. Their interests are aligned for now. They are using each other. A pause. And they are both trying to use you, in different directions for different purposes, but the mechanism is the same. Amara pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. What do you need me to do? Nothing that puts you at risk, he said immediately. I need you to stay away from Reyes until I can get my lawyers positioned. I need you to... That's not what I asked, she said. I asked what you need. Not what you want me to do to keep myself comfortable. A longer pause. Park is moving faster than I anticipated. The file he sent you was a test. He wanted to see whether you would run to Reyes or come back to me. Either outcome was useful to him. If you went to Reyes, he gains a witness. If you came back to me, he knows the bond is forming and he knows he needs to break it before it solidifies. She heard him shift, the sound of a man standing, moving, the phone carried across a room. He is going to escalate. In the next 48 hours, he is going to do something that makes a sustained public connection between you and me impossible. What does that look like? It looks like your name in a story, Minji said. A leak to a journalist. Amara Washington, fashion designer, connected to organized crime figure Kang Min-jae. Meridian pulls the contract. Everything you just built in that meeting today is gone before the ink dries. The kitchen was very quiet. When? Amara said. I don't know exactly. Soon. She stood up from the table and walked to the window that looked out over Ardmore. The street below was ordinary. A woman walking a dog, a man carrying groceries, a kid on a bike taking the corner too fast. The entirely normal architecture of a Tuesday evening in Koreatown. Then we don't wait for him to do it, she said. Min-jae was quiet for a moment. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that the only thing that makes me a useful pressure point is uncertainty, she said. If my connection to you is already public, If I am the one who makes it public, on my terms, in a way I control, then the leak doesn't destroy anything. It just confirms something I already said. Amara, that is not a small thing to— I know what it is, she said. I'm not asking you if it's small. I'm asking you if it would work. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, not softer, but different. The particular quality of a man who is being surprised by someone in a way he had not prepared for. It could work, if you got ahead of it, if the framing was yours. Then that's what I'm going to do, she said. She called Deshaun at 9 that night. He came over at 9:45 with Vietnamese food from the place on Western and the particular brand of alert, unshockable attention that had made him valuable in an industry that ran on chaos. She told him everything. Not everything. Not the file's specific contents, not the detail of the failed paternity test or the 7-digit case number, but enough. The gala, Minjai, the Meridian meeting, the phone call from Park's man, Reyes, the shape of what was about to happen if she did not move first. Deshaun ate his food and listened and did not interrupt until she finished. Then he said, "You want to go on record?" "I want to control the story," she said. "That's the same thing." "I know." "Well, he set down his chopsticks. "There's a journalist," he said, "Marcus Webb. He writes for a cultural platform. Serious editorial, good readership, the kind of audience that includes people in the industry. He's done pieces on designers before. Real pieces, not puff." He looked at her. "He would not sensationalize it." "Can you reach him tonight?" "Probably." Deshaun looked at her for a long moment with the focused assessment of someone who was trying to determine not whether she had thought this through, but whether she had thought through the right parts of it. "Amara, when this story runs, whatever version of it runs, Meridian is going to call you." "I know. And it might not be to confirm the contract." "I know that too," she said. "But if I don't do this, Park runs his version in 48 hours, and Meridian calls me to cancel regardless. At least this way I get to be the one who spoke first." Deshaun picked up his phone. Marcus Webb agreed to meet the following morning. She did not sleep that night. She worked instead, went back to the proposal she had been drafting for Meridian, the 6-piece collection, and worked on it for 6 hours because working on it was the only way she knew how to hold the dual reality of the situation. That the contract might survive what was coming, and that it might not, and that she was going to do what she was going to do regardless. At 4 in the morning, she set down the pencil and looked at what she had. The proposal was good. It was clear and specific and grounded in a genuine creative vision, and it contained a sourcing plan that was both ethical and executable, and a timeline that was ambitious without being dishonest. It was the best professional document she had ever produced. She looked at it for a while, and then she put it in a folder, and she went and stood by the window and looked at the pre-dawn Ardmore Street, and she thought about her grandmother and what Clara would have said about all of it. She thought Clara would have said, "You already know what to do, baby. You always know. You just wait too long to trust it." At 7:30 the next morning, she got a text from a number she did not recognize. No name, no greeting, just an address in El Sereno and a time, 10 a.m. "Come alone." She stared at the message. She forwarded it to Minji's number. His response came in 40 seconds. "That's Park. Don't go." She typed back. "What does he want?" "Minji, to look at you, to assess how much leverage you are. Do not go." She thought about it for 90 seconds. Then she typed, "I'm going. Have Chen nearby but not visible." Minji's response took longer this time. Almost 3 minutes, which she had come to understand was a long time for him. Then, "Chen will be 1 block east. If you're not out in 20 minutes, he comes in." She typed, "Give me 30. No response. Then, after a minute, 25. The address in El Sereno was a restaurant, closed at that hour, the gate down over the front, but the side door open when she knocked, and a man she didn't recognize led her through a dim kitchen that smelled of oil and overnight cleaning product, and out into a back room with 4 chairs and a table and fluorescent light that buzzed slightly at a frequency that set her back teeth on edge. Park Sung-jin was already sitting at the table. He was 53 or 54, she guessed, compact, with a stillness that was superficially similar to Min Jae's but was different in its fundamental quality, the way two silences could be different. Min Jae's stillness was the stillness of a man who had made his decisions and lived inside them, while Park's was the stillness of a man who was permanently calculating, the surface calm of a face that was always somewhere else underneath. He was wearing a plain gray jacket. He had a cup of tea in front of him. He did not stand when she came in. "Sit down," he said. "I'll stand," she said. He looked at her. He had the kind of eyes that did their actual work without movement, reading her in the flat fluorescent light without the usual social performance of looking. "You found the errors in the file," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "I expected you to," he said. "I constructed them deliberately." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because a file with no errors is a file from someone who is trying to deceive you," he said. "A file with discoverable errors is a test. I wanted to know whether you were smart enough to find them, and whether, having found them, you would run back to him, or whether you would think." He tilted his head slightly. "You thought. That's good. That's actually what I needed." "What do you want?" she said. "I want you to understand what you're in the middle of," Park said. He wrapped both hands around his teacup, unhurried, the gesture of a man who had nowhere to be. "Min Jae is not your father. The paternity claim is real. It's the one true thing in the file, despite the document being fabricated. I built a false document around a true result because I needed you to question the document's origin rather than the result itself." He looked at her steadily. "The paternity test was conducted in 2003. Min Jae commissioned it himself. The result was exclusion. He has known for 22 years that he is not your biological father." Amara stood in the fluorescent light and did not move. "He chose to maintain the fiction," Park said, "because the fiction serves him. Not in the way I described in the file. I invented the strategic framing, the loyalty asset language, but in a way that is perhaps more personally dishonest. He needs to believe he owes Naomi Washington a debt. He needs to believe that watching over you is how he pays it. Because Kang Min Jae is a man who has done a great deal of damage in this world, and the story of protecting his daughter is the story that makes him something other than what he is." The buzzing light, the smell of oil, her own heartbeat, louder than it should have been in a quiet room. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because Minji's organization is ending," Park said. "I have been positioning for 14 months. In approximately 3 weeks, the federal partnership I've been building with certain interests in the city will result in a set of indictments that will dismantle what he has built. He will be prosecuted. His operation will be absorbed." He paused. "You are going to be caught in that blast radius unless you separate from him now, completely and publicly." "And if I separate from him," she said, "who benefits?" Park looked at her without blinking. "I benefit. My case against him is strengthened if his closest personal connection publicly distances herself. It adds credibility to the indictment narrative." He paused. "But you also benefit. You keep the Meridian contract. You keep the career you just built the door to. You keep your name clean." "And the paternity," she said. "If he's not my biological father, then he's a man who built an elaborate emotional relationship with a woman he had decided to claim as his daughter," Park said. "Whether that is love or strategy is a question I cannot answer for you. It may be both. These things frequently are." Amara looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, with the same kind of focused attention she brought to construction, not looking for what she expected to find, but looking for what was actually there. His face was a controlled surface. His hands were steady on the teacup. His stillness was the permanent calculation she had identified when she walked in, and the calculation was running behind everything he said, and she could not see its full architecture, but she could see its shape, the outline of it, the way you could see the structure of a garment even when it was on the hanger and not on a body. "You said the test result was true," she said, "but the document was fabricated." "Yes." "So the original document exists somewhere." "Yes." "And Min Jae has it." A pause. Fractional. Almost nothing. But there. "He would have kept it," Park said. "So if I ask him for it," she said, "and he gives it to me, I have the real answer. And if he doesn't give it to me, or if he denies it exists, I have a different answer. Park looked at her. Something moved behind his calculated stillness. Not respect exactly, but its functional equivalent, the adjustment a person made when they encountered more precision than they had budgeted for. Yes, he said. That's correct. Then I don't need you, she said. I have what I came for. She turned toward the door. Miss Washington. His voice stopped her. The indictments are real. They are coming regardless of what you do. When they arrive, your proximity to him will be scrutinized. I am offering you a clean exit. She turned back. What you're offering me, she said, is a transaction. You get what you need, and I get to keep what I built. That's not an exit. That's a different door into the same building. She held his gaze. I'll find my own exit. She walked out through the kitchen and through the side door into the El Sereno morning, and Chen was there, 1 block east, exactly where Minjae had said he would be. She called Minjae from the car. What did he say? Minjae said. He said you commissioned a paternity test in 2003, she said. He said the result was exclusion. He said you've known for 22 years that you are not my biological father. The silence on the line was different from every other silence she had heard from him. This one had a texture. Not the weight of something being carried, but the weight of something being finally, irrevocably set down. Is it true? She said. He did not answer immediately. The car moved through the El Sereno streets, past the ordinary Tuesday morning of a neighborhood going about its life, and she sat in the back with the phone against her ear, and she waited, and the waiting was the most specific and complete silence she had experienced since she had stood in the ballroom with wine soaking through turquoise silk and counted backward from 10. Yes, he said. The word arrived, and she absorbed it, and the car kept moving, and the city went on. Then tell me, she said, what I actually am to you. Another silence. Then, come to me, he said. Not Chen. Come yourself. I'll tell you everything. All of it. I won't edit it this time. I'm coming, she said. But Minjae? She stopped. If what you tell me doesn't hold up, if I ask you for the original document and you don't give it to me, I walk out and I go to Reyes and I tell her everything I know, all of it, including today. A pause. I'll have it on the table when you arrive, he said. She ended the call. The car turned north and the city opened up around it, vast and indifferent and full of lives being lived in the middle of their own irresolvable complications. And Amara sat in the back with her hands in her lap, and she thought about what it meant that the man who had put his jacket across her shoulders 6 days ago had known for 22 years that he was not her father, and had looked her in the eye in a kitchen in Koreatown at 3 in the morning and said those 3 words anyway. She thought about what it meant that he had said them. She thought about what it meant that some part of her, even now, even with the test result sitting in her chest like a stone, did not entirely want the answer to be simple. The car pulled up outside Minjae's building. She got out. She went up. The outer office was empty again. The door to the inner office was open, and Minjae was standing at the window with his back to her, the city behind him, and on the table in the center of the room was a single manila folder, closed, with nothing written on the outside. She crossed the room. She opened the folder. The document inside was original, not scanned, not printed. The actual paper, aged at the edges, the kind of aging that happened to paper in a filed folder over 22 years. Los Angeles County General letterhead, the correct 7-digit case number format, the date she had been looking for. Naomi Washington, 23. And at the bottom, the results she already knew, printed in the clinical language of a laboratory that had no interest in what the words meant to the people they concerned. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. She closed the folder. She put her hands flat on the table. Naomi was the love of my life, Minjae said. He had not turned from the window. His voice was the quietest she had heard it. I was with her for 2 years. The last 8 months of those 2 years, she was also seeing someone else. I knew, and I couldn't make myself leave. She was the only person who had ever made me feel like what I was doing with my life was not the totality of what I was. He paused. When she died, I was in that hospital. I held you. I looked at your face and you looked like her in a way that I needed to be true, so I let myself believe it was true. He turned from the window finally. His face was the most exposed she had seen it. Not broken, but stripped of the layers that 40 years of operating in a world that required layers had built up around it. When I had the test done, 7 years later, I already knew what it would say. I had known for years. I just needed a document. And then you kept watching, she said. I kept watching, he said. Because you loved her. Because she asked me to, he said. Before she died. She knew. Naomi was clear-eyed about everything, including what was happening to her. She asked me to make sure her daughter had someone watching. She said, I don't care if she ever knows you exist. Just make sure she's not alone in it. His jaw tightened. And then I told you I was your father, and that was... He stopped. That was me taking something that wasn't mine. The room was very quiet. Who is my biological father? She said. I don't know, he said. Naomi never told me. I don't know if she told anyone. Amara looked at the folder on the table. She looked at the window and the city behind him. She looked at the dragon tattoo on his neck, the fine, traditional lines of it, and she thought about a woman painting a mural 15 feet high at 11 o'clock at night in a warehouse district that had since become something else entirely. And she thought about what it meant to be loved clearly by someone who saw you fully. And she thought about what it meant to carry that love for 29 years after the person was gone. You lied to me, she said. Yes. And you've been in my life from the outside for 29 years based on a promise to a woman who asked you to make sure I wasn't alone. Yes. And now Park is about to bring federal indictments, and Reyes wants me to testify, and my Meridian contract is hanging on what happens in the next 48 hours, she said. Yes, he said. She picked up the folder. She held it in both hands, and she looked at it, and she thought about all the things it was and was not, and she thought about the coat with her grandmother's geometry in the lining, and she thought about a woman who had never stopped being 23 years old because she had never gotten the chance. And she made a decision. Not a small one, not the kind that could be unmade easily, the kind that restructured everything that came after it. She looked at Minji. Call your lawyer, she said. Right now. I want to understand exactly what the indictments cover and what testimony would actually mean. Because if I am going to make a decision about Reyes, I am going to make it with complete information. She set the folder back on the table. And then we are going to talk about what you actually are to me. Not what you told me you were, what you actually are. And we are going to be completely honest about it this time. Min-jae looked at her for a moment, then he reached for his phone. And Min-jae, she said. He stopped. Whatever this is between us, she said, it is not nothing. I need you to know that I know that. Whatever else is true. She paused. But it is also not what you told me it was. And we are going to have to figure out what it actually is without the story you built around it. She held his gaze. Can you do that? He looked at her with the look she had spent 6 days trying to name, and she thought now that she finally had the name for it. It was the look of a man who had been waiting for someone to see him accurately, and had spent so long waiting that the arrival of it felt indistinguishable from grief. Yes, he said. He dialed. Outside the 14th floor window, the Los Angeles afternoon was moving toward evening, the light beginning its long descent toward the particular gold that the city produced in the last hour before dark. And somewhere in that city, Park Sung-jin was executing his next move, and Detective Reyes was waiting for a call that had not come. And Marcus Webb was waiting for a morning meeting that was still scheduled, and Vera Stein was in her Century City office with a contract that had not yet been signed. And all of it was in motion simultaneously, every piece of it converging toward the same point, the same hour, the same room, where everything would finally be required to be what it actually was, rather than what anyone had needed it to be. The lawyer answered on the second ring, and Amara Washington stood in the 14th floor office of a man who was not her father, and had loved her mother, and had watched over her for 29 years, and had lied to her about the most important thing, and had given her the truth when she asked for it. And she stood very straight, and she breathed, and she prepared herself for what was coming. Min-jae's lawyer was a woman named Judith Carr. She arrived at the 14th floor office 40 minutes after the call, carrying a leather briefcase that had been used long enough to show it at the corners, wearing a charcoal suit that matched the deliberate efficiency of everything else about her. She was 61 years old and had spent 34 of those years in criminal defense, and she looked at Amara the way experienced lawyers looked at unexpected variables, not with hostility, but with the particular alertness of someone who was immediately recalculating the room's geometry. She sat. She opened the briefcase. She put 3 folders on the table in a precise row. "Tell me what Reyes said to you," she said to Amara. "Word for word, as close as you can get," Amara told her. Judith listened without interrupting, her pen making occasional marks on a legal pad that Amara could not read from across the table. When Amara finished, Judith set down the pen. "She cold called you," Judith said. "Yes?" "No prior contact, no subpoena, no formal request through counsel." "Nothing." Judith looked at Min Jae. "She's fishing. She doesn't have enough for a subpoena yet, or she would have led with it." She tapped the legal pad with one finger. "Park gave her your name and your connection to Minji, and she's trying to determine how much you actually know before she commits to a formal approach." "What happens if she does commit?" Amara said. "If she subpoenas you, you have 2 options. You testify truthfully about what you know, which is limited to the last 6 days and contains nothing that would materially advance a federal indictment. Or you assert your right to counsel and say nothing until I'm in the room." Judith paused. "What you do not do under any circumstances is speak to her informally again. If she calls, you say one sentence: 'I have retained counsel and all contact should go through them.' Then you give her my number and you hang up." "And the indictments," Amar said. "Are they real?" Judith looked at her steadily. "Park has been building a federal partnership for over a year. There are indictments coming. Whether they result in convictions is a different question, and one I have been preparing for considerably longer than Park has been preparing his case." She opened the first folder. "What Park does not know, what he has not known, because the information was structured to prevent him from knowing it, is that Min Jae has been in voluntary cooperation discussions with a separate federal unit for 7 months." Amara turned to look at Min Jae. He was standing at the window again. He had been standing at the window for most of the conversation, his back partially turned, the city behind him going gold in the late afternoon light. He did not look at her when Judith spoke. He looked at the city. "Cooperation on what?" Amara said. "On Park," Judith said. "On the network Park has been building. On the federal contacts Park has been cultivating, several of whom are themselves the subject of separate investigations." She closed the folder. "The indictments that come down in 3 weeks will not be what Park expects them to be." Amara sat with that for a moment. "So he's been building a case against the man who was building a case against him. For 7 months," Judith said. "Yes. And Park doesn't know." "Park believes he controls the timeline," Judith said. "He does not control the timeline." Amara looked at Minji's back, the set of his shoulders, the way he held his weight, slightly forward, the posture of a man who was always, even standing still, prepared to move. "Why didn't you tell me this?" she said. He turned from the window. "Because the cooperation is confidential. If it became known that I was in discussions, the case collapses and several people in protective arrangements become exposed." He looked at her directly. "I could not tell you. Not because I didn't trust you. Because the consequence of it leaking, any version of it leaking, was too large. And now?" "Now you're inside it," Judith said. "The moment Reyes called you, you became part of the landscape of this case, whether you wanted to be or not. So you need to know." The room held that. Amara put her hands flat on the table again. The gesture she made, she was beginning to understand when she needed to feel something solid. "What do you need from me?" she said. "Nothing," Minji said. She looked at him. "I need nothing from you," he said. "That is not why I told you. I told you because you asked me to be honest, and I am trying to learn how to do that with you." He came away from the window and sat down at the table for the first time, across from her, and she could see his face fully in the evening light. The lines of it, the tattoo, the eyes that were tired in a way that 40 years rather than 6 days had made. "Whatever happens in 3 weeks, it will happen. Your name will not be part of it. Judith will make sure of that." "I can make sure of that," Judith confirmed. "And the Meridian contract," Amara said. "Is yours," Minjae said, "independently of me." Vera Stein responded to the work. That is not something I manufactured, and it is not something that can be taken from you by what happens to me." Amara looked at the table. She looked at the folder with the 22-year-old paternity test inside it. She looked at Judith's 3 folders in their precise row. She looked at Minji's hands on the table, the prominent knuckles, the hands that had carried a world she had not known existed while she had been painting kitchen walls and working alterations jobs and teaching herself embroidery techniques from her grandmother's instructions. "I want to ask you something," she said. He waited. "The dress?" she said. "The package. The turquoise silk with the Korean embroidery." She paused. "You said there was more to that story. Tell me now." He was quiet for a moment, then, "The fabric came from a workshop in Jeonju. Naomi had a connection there, a woman she had corresponded with about natural dyes before she died. I maintained the connection. I sent money to the workshop for years, not for any reason, just because it was a connection of hers, and letting it die felt like another loss." He stopped. "When I saw what happened to your dress at the gala, I called the workshop. I described what you had made from what I had seen of it. The turquoise, the geometric neckline work, the cuff work. I asked them to create something using their best materials, their best work, in the tradition that Naomi had loved." He paused. "The note I wrote, the line about the first thread, I meant that your grandmother gave you the technical foundation and your talent built everything on top of it. I was not trying to claim anything for myself. I was trying to say that what was destroyed could not actually be destroyed, because it was not in the dress. It was in you." Amara looked at him for a long time. "That is the most honest thing you have said to me," she said. "I know," he said. She nodded once. She picked up the folder with the paternity test, and she stood, and she held it for a moment, and then she set it back down on the table. "Keep it," she said. "I know what it says. I don't need the paper." She looked at Judith. "I'll say nothing to Reyes without you in the room." "That's all I need," Judith said. Amara picked up her bag. She walked to the door of the inner office, and then she stopped, and she turned back, and she looked at Minjae one final time in the evening light. "I'm going to need some time," she said, "to figure out what you are to me, what this is. I can't name it right now, and I'm not going to try." She paused. "But I'm not walking away from it. I want you to know that. Whatever it is, I'm not walking away from it." Something moved across his face. Not relief exactly. Something quieter and more permanent than relief. "I'll be here," he said. She left. The following 3 weeks were the longest of her life, and also, in a way she could not have predicted, among the most productive. She worked on the Meridian proposal with the focused intensity of someone who understood that the work was the one thing in her life that was entirely hers, not complicated by other people's needs or histories, or the converging machinery of federal investigations and personal reckoning. She finalized the 6-piece collection concept and built the sourcing plan and wrote the timeline and sent it to Vera Stein's office 11 days before the deadline she had been given, because she had said 2 weeks and she had meant it. Stein's contracts team called the following morning to discuss terms. The day after the contract was signed, the indictments came down. They were not what anyone had publicly expected. Park Sung-jin was among those indicted, on charges that included racketeering, obstruction of justice, and the corruption of 3 federal contacts whose names appeared in the indictment alongside his. Min Jae's name was in the documentation. It could not have been absent given the nature of his history, but it appeared in the specific context of a cooperating party, and Judith had been precise and thorough in ensuring that the framing around it was accurate rather than damning. The story ran in several outlets. Amara's name did not appear in any of them. Marcus Webb called her 2 days after the indictments. She had not canceled the meeting she had originally scheduled with him. She had rescheduled it twice, but not canceled. They met at a coffee place in Los Feliz, and she told him the part of the story that was hers to tell. The gala, the dress, the Meridian meeting, the experience of being a designer who had spent a decade being evaluated through the lens of her appearance before anyone looked at her work. She said nothing about Minjae that was not already public record. She said nothing about Park or Reyes or the cooperation agreement. What she told Marcus Webb was the story of the dress, what she made, what it meant, what it cost to walk into a room wearing the proof of your own ambition and have it destroyed in 4 seconds by someone who had never once needed to prove anything. He wrote it well. He wrote it the way good journalists wrote things when the story was genuinely good, without embellishment, without manufactured pathos, letting the actual facts carry the weight because the actual facts were sufficient. The piece ran 3 weeks later in a publication whose readership included the people who mattered in the industry Amara was building herself into, and the response was significant and immediate and entirely about the work. Isabella Beaumont read the piece in her car in the parking structure of a building in Culver City, where the Meridian Fashion Foundation's satellite offices were located. She had been working there for 6 weeks by then, not because her father had told her to, not because Minjie's original condition still carried the legal weight it had in the first weeks after the gala, but because somewhere in the process of showing up and doing the work without praise or recognition, something had shifted in her that she did not entirely have language for yet. She had met in those 6 weeks 43 young designers. She had learned 37 of their names without being prompted. She had learned, slowly and with considerable difficulty, how to listen to someone describe their work without filtering it through the lens of what she personally found aesthetically interesting. She had made mistakes, said the wrong thing twice, once to a 19-year-old from Boyle Heights, whose work she had evaluated using vocabulary that belonged to a different context, and once to a 22-year-old from Inglewood, whose material choices she had questioned without understanding the supply constraints she was working within. Both times she had gone back the following day and acknowledged what she had said and why it had been wrong. Both times the response had been something more complicated than forgiveness and more useful than resentment. She read the piece about Amara Washington twice in her car in the parking structure, and then she sat for a while with the phone in her lap, and she thought about a woman standing in a ballroom with wine soaking through turquoise silk, counting backward from 10. She called the foundation's director and told her she was running 10 minutes late. Then she got out of the car and went in. She did not call Amara. She thought about it. She drafted the message 3 times over the following 2 weeks and deleted all 3 drafts because all 3 were, at their root, about her transformation, her understanding, her need to be seen as having changed. She understood gradually that an apology that was fundamentally about the person apologizing was not an apology. It was a transaction dressed in the language of remorse. She went back to work instead. 6 weeks after the piece ran, Amar's phone showed an unknown number that she almost did not answer. She answered it. "This is Isabella Beaumont," the voice said. Amara sat down. She was in the studio space she had leased in the Arts District 2 weeks after the Meridian contract was signed. A real studio, 1,200 square feet, north-facing windows, concrete floors, the sewing machine from the apartment installed on a proper workbench, and 2 additional industrial machines alongside it. She sat on the edge of the workbench and looked at the north light coming through the windows, and she said nothing. "I'm not calling for forgiveness," Isabella said. Her voice was careful in the specific way of someone who had rehearsed the being careful rather than the words. "I don't think I've earned the right to ask for that. I'm calling because I read the piece, and I wanted you to know that I understand, more than I did, better than I did, what I destroyed, not just the dress." A pause. "I'm working at the Meridian Foundation now. I don't know if you knew that. I'm not saying it to get credit. I'm saying it because I think you should know that the person who poured that wine is not the person doing this work. And I know that distinction only matters if the work is real, and I'm trying to make it real." Amara looked at the north light. She looked at the sewing machine on the workbench. Her grandmother's machine, moved from the Ardmore apartment to this space, the most permanent object in a room that was still becoming itself. "I know about the foundation," she said. A pause. "Okay." "I know you've been there 6 weeks," Amara said. "Deshawn knows someone who works in their development office. I've been following it." Another pause. Longer. "Why?" Isabella said. "Because I wanted to know if it was real," Amara said. "The change. I wanted to know if you were doing the work or performing the doing of it. And I think you're doing the work," Amara said. "I think it's harder than you expected, and I think you're still figuring out how to do it without making it about yourself. But I think you're doing it." Isabella was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was slightly different. The rehearsed, careful quality had loosened just slightly, enough to let something underneath it be audible. "That's more than I deserve right now." "Probably," Amara said. "But it's accurate, and I don't have much use for giving people less than the accurate thing." She heard Isabella exhale. Is there anything you need from me? For the collection? Or the foundation work? Anything I can actually do?" Amara thought about it. "There are 3 designers at the foundation I want to look at. A 19-year-old from Boyle Heights and a 22-year-old from Inglewood are 2 of them. Deshawn can get you their names. Make sure they get real consideration. Not a courtesy look. Real." "Okay," Isabella said. "I can do that." "Then that's enough for now," Amara said. She ended the call. She sat on the workbench in the north light for a while after that, and she thought about what it meant that she had said "for now." The 2 words that left a door open without specifying what would come through it or when. She had not planned to say them. They had arrived in the sentence on their own, the way things arrived when you had stopped trying to engineer every outcome and had started letting the actual shape of things determine the words. She picked up her marking pen and went back to work. Minjae came to the studio 3 weeks later. He called first. He always called first now. It was one of the understandings that had developed between them in the months since the 14th floor office, not through explicit negotiation, but through the slow, imperfect process of 2 people learning how to exist in proximity to each other without the structure of a story that was not true. He called, and she said yes, and he came on a Saturday morning when the studio was quiet and the north light was good, and she had been working since 6 and had the kind of productive dishevelment around her. Pattern pieces pinned to the cutting table, 3 different fabric samples draped over the standing form, 2 coffee cups at different stages of being forgotten, that she had stopped being self-conscious about in her own space. He brought nothing, no gesture, no gift. He had learned, or was learning, which things she received and which things felt like management, and he had stopped trying to manage her. He looked at the collection pieces on the rail. He moved along them slowly, the way she had watched Vera Stein move along them, but differently. Not assessing, just looking, in the way of someone who was trying to understand something that did not have a simple explanation. He stopped at the centerpiece. A coat, not the 60-hour coat that had gone to the Meridian meeting, but something evolved from it, built on the same structure, but pushed further. The shoulders more precise, the lining now a full narrative panel of geometric pattern derived from her grandmother's embroidery and expanded into something that was entirely Amara's own translation. The outer fabric was a deep turquoise. He looked at it for a long time. "The collection debuts in 8 weeks, she said. She was at the cutting table, marking a pattern, not looking up. "Meridian is doing the production support. I'm keeping primary construction on 4 of the 6 pieces. The coat is mine entirely." "It's extraordinary," he said. Not a compliment in the social sense. A statement. "I know," she said. She still did not look up. He moved away from the rail and sat down in the chair she kept near the window. A plain wooden chair, nothing comfortable, the kind of chair that communicated that sitting was permitted, but lingering required justification. He sat in it with his elbows on his knees, and he looked at the floor. "The cooperation agreement closed last week," he said. "Judith filed the final documentation. Park's legal team entered a plea on 2 of the 7 counts. The federal partnership he built is being dissolved." He paused. "My exposure was... There are operational changes I've made. Significant ones. Judith believes the remaining legal questions will resolve without prosecution." "Believes," Amar said. "Believes with a high degree of confidence," he said. "That's not the same as certain." "No," he said. "It isn't." She set down the marking pen. She looked at him across the studio. The man in the wooden chair with his elbows on his knees, the dragon tattoo visible above his collar, the tiredness in his face that was different from the tiredness she had first seen in the 14th floor office, a tiredness that had something resolved underneath it, the specific exhaustion of a person who has put down something heavy after a very long time. "Are you getting out?" she said. "Of the life?" He looked at her. "I have been getting out for 7 months. It is not a quick process. It is not a clean process. There are obligations and structures and people whose arrangements are affected by my arrangements, and you cannot simply close a door on 20 years. He paused. But yes, I am getting out. Why? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. The answer was visible in his face before he said it. She had learned to read him, imperfectly but genuinely, the way you learn to read a complex garment, understanding where the construction was intentional and where it was compensatory. Because I'm 67 years old when I die inside if I do not change, he said. Because the thing that made me choose this life also made me believe for 20 years that watching from a distance was the same as being present. He stopped. Because I would like, before I am actually an old man, to know what it is to be in a room with someone without calculating the room. The studio held that. Amara picked up the marking pen and turned back to the pattern. You can come to the debut, she said, if you want. I want, he said. You'll sit in the audience. You won't tell anyone who you are to me, not because I'm ashamed of it, whatever it is, but because that story is mine to tell when I'm ready to tell it, and I'm not ready yet. I understand, he said, and Minjae. She still did not look up from the pattern. I've been thinking about what you said, about Naomi asking you to make sure I wasn't alone in it. She paused. I don't know what you are to me. I'm not going to pretend I do, but I think, whatever word fits, whatever this is, I think she would have been right to ask you. I think she knew what she was asking. She heard him breathe. She kept working. He stayed for another hour. They talked about small things, the sourcing of the turquoise fabric, a supply chain issue she was navigating, the particular difficulty of the coat's shoulder construction at production scale. He listened and occasionally asked a question that was useful and did not pretend a knowledge he did not have. When he left, he said he would see her in 8 weeks, and she said yes, and he went. She worked until 7 that evening. The debut was on a Thursday in November, in a space in the Arts District that Meridian had selected. An old warehouse converted into a clean-lined venue with good ceiling height and a concrete floor, and the kind of lighting that treated clothing as what it was rather than a spectacle. 230 guests. The industry people Vera Stein had gathered, the cultural journalists, 3 buyers from major retailers, the foundation designers Deshawn had connected to Isabella, who had been given seats in the 3rd row. Amara was backstage until the last model went out. Then she walked out. She did not look at the audience when she came out. She looked at the collection, her 6 pieces moving in the venue's deliberate light, the geometric patterns catching and releasing it, the coat at the end of the line with its turquoise surface and its secret interior, the lining that only the person wearing it would feel. She looked at what she had made, and she let herself look at it fully, without the protective distance she usually maintained, without the self-editing that had become as instinctive as breathing. It was good. It was very good. The response from the room arrived as a physical thing. Not the performed applause of a polite event, but the genuine sound of people responding to something that had done what it was meant to do. And she stood at the end of the runway and received it with her shoulders back and her chin level and her hands at her sides, not performing composure but actually inside it. She looked at the audience then. 3rd row, left side. Deshawn grinning in a way that communicated multiple things simultaneously. Beside him, 2 young women she recognized from the photographs Isabella had sent her. The 19-year-old from Boyle Heights and the 22-year-old from Inglewood, both of them watching the collection with the focused, hungry attention of people who were taking everything in because they needed it. Further back, near the right wall, Isabella Beaumont, standing rather than sitting, partially because the room had filled past capacity, and partially because she was the kind of person who still found it difficult to be invisible, even when she was trying. She was not looking at Amara. She was looking at the coat. And in her face was something that Amara recognized from months of studying the faces of people who encountered work that was better than they had expected and were encountering themselves in the process. And near the back, against the wall, in a charcoal suit that was perfectly fitted and said nothing about itself, Kang Minjae. He was not applauding. His hands were at his sides. He was looking at her, not at the collection, at her, with the look she had spent months learning to name and had finally named, the look of a man who had kept a promise. She held his gaze for a moment. Just a moment. Then she looked away, back at the collection, back at the work, back at the thing that was entirely and completely hers. Afterward, in the slow dispersal of the crowd, she found herself standing with Deshawn near the coat, which had been returned to its rail, and she was answering a buyer's questions about production timeline when she saw Isabella moving toward the exit. Not toward Amara, just toward the door, leaving without making it an event. At the exit, Isabella paused. She looked back at the coat one more time. Then she left. Amara noted it. She filed it away in the part of her that was learning, slowly, the difference between people who changed because it benefited them and people who changed because they had finally seen something clearly enough to be unable to unsee it. The verdict on Isabella was not in yet. She was aware of that. But the evidence was accumulating in one direction. Later, when the venue had mostly emptied and the lighting had been brought up to working level and the Meridian team was beginning the process of taking things down, Amara found herself standing alone near the coat. She heard footsteps. She knew them without looking. Minjae stopped beside her. He looked at the coat. She looked at the coat. They stood there, the two of them, in the working light of the emptying venue, and neither of them spoke for a while. She would have loved it, he said. Amara did not ask who he meant. I know, she said. She reached out and straightened the coat on the hanger. A small adjustment, barely necessary, the habit of a craftsperson in the presence of her own work. Her hand was steady. I've been thinking about what to call it, she said. The collection. Meridian wants a title for the catalog. What are you thinking? He said. She looked at the coat, at the turquoise of it, at the shoulder line she had rebuilt 4 times before it was right, and the lining that nobody in the room tonight had seen, and that the person who wore it would feel against their skin without being able to name why it mattered, only that it did. Naomi, she said. Minjae was very still beside her. Not for you, she said, not as a gesture toward what we are or what we're figuring out. For her. Because she was 23 and she painted murals 15 feet high at 11 o'clock at night, and I never got to know her, and this is what I can do with that. She heard him breathe. It was not the breath of a composed man. It was the breath of a man who had been holding something for a very long time and had been given, at last, a place to set it down. Yes, he said. That's right. They stood there in the working light while the venue emptied around them, and the coat hung between them in its turquoise stillness, and the geometry her grandmother had given her was folded inside it where only the wearer would know, and the name of a woman who had been 23 years old was almost now something other than a loss. Amara reached over and touched the lapel of the coat one more time, just with 2 fingers, just to feel the weight of what she had made. It was solid. It was real. It had cost exactly what it had cost, and she had paid that price entirely, and what she had made with the payment was standing here in the light, which was the only thing that had ever actually mattered. She let go of the lapel,